welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay then, so for the greenhouse storage, you know, if you saw the earlier episodes, the door, I've got a lot of play in the bottom of the door here, which means basically that if you shut the door, it doesn't always seal, so I've got this kind of gap running up here. So what I need to do is basically hold the door in like that. So what I need to do is make some rollers for the bottom here to make sure that the door stays kind of in that position, but at the same time it needs to be able to flow over the over this run here without causing any problems. Okay, so what I've made are these little runners, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail at the moment, but basically it's two pieces of aluminium turned on a lathe, and basically what that's going to do is that's going to roll like a wheel. I don't know if you can see that, but it's going to roll like a wheel on the inside of this track here, and that's going to be bolted to the underneath of the door, which will allow the door to easily run backwards and forwards, but it will also keep the door in place so that when it's shut like that, it holds it against the seal, and I get a nice tight seal all the way up to the top of the door. Okay, so the roller, as you can see, is made up of basically three separate parts. So basically that will roll against the surface. So if I've got the edge of the door like that, that'll actually roll kind of like that. And basically the centre part of the aluminium there, this part here, that basically stays stationary. So that will be bolted in and hard against the door, and then this part here basically will rotate around that like that to basically forming the wheel. There's no bearing or anything in there. You know, there's no real need for that. But basically, those are the three parts which are effectively the functional parts, if you like. So basically, all it is three separate parts. Obviously, we've got a bolt like that, which has got that type of top on it, and what that allows you to do is sit that inside there so that it's flush on the top there, and that will allow me to bolt that in. And then basically what I've got is two pieces of aluminium which I've turned on the lathe, which are effectively one, the actual concept of it is pretty much the same. One's obviously bigger than the other, and one sits inside the other. So that's the actual wheel, that's the part that moves, and all that is obviously a circular piece of aluminium with a rebate cut into the centre of it like that. So when that sits inside it, that basically is flush at the bottom there, but allows that to rotate round. It's slightly long, I don't know if you can see that, but there's about a millimetre or two, 80th or so on there, so that basically will allow that to spin, and it won't catch on the door, so that will enable that to spin round easily. And then we got this centre part here, which is effectively a similar thing, just slightly smaller. And obviously this surface here is the surface that it'll basically rotate round. And then I've just done exactly the same thing on the inside. So there's a rebate there for the bolt. So that will basically sit in there, and then that basically sits inside there. Now this obviously, I know everybody hasn't got a lathe, so you know there are other ways of doing this. What you could basically do is just have if you get a core cutter, which cuts circles out of wood or plastic, whatever, you could potentially cut a plastic wheel, and then just with a bolt and two nuts, you could effectively get the same functionality as this. So you don't necessarily need to have a lathe. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail when I'm showing you how I made this. But basically, that's the part that I've made for the bottom of the door. Obviously, these two parts here are made out of aluminium. So those two parts are made out of aluminium. Obviously, that's a steel bolt. Now I've made this sort of dimensional wise, that's kind of 15mm that way, so it'll actually sit 15mm from the bottom of the door. Now I could have made that slightly bigger, but what I thought is if I make it this big, what I can do is I can basically put some washers on that side there and pack it up and down to get the adjustment as I'm fitting it, and then the overall sort of diameter of the outer wheel is 30mm, which is basically just over an inch, obviously an inch being 24, so it's kind of an inch and about an inch and a quarter or so wide in total. So that's the actual part which I'll bolt onto the bottom of the door. I'll now show you how I made that. Okay, so we're going to start off by making this part. As you can see, I've got a piece of aluminium in the chuck of the lathe, and all that is basically is just a small piece of bar like that. All I've done is I've just cut off a bit off the bottom, and as you can see, the actual diameter there. This part originally obviously came off here, so as you can see, this part at the front here, that's actually the right diameter for the wheel. So all I need to do is basically take off this material here so that it's all the same diameter, so that I can make the second one of those. So I'll just show you how to do that now. Okay, so what I'm going to do on the end here, I've basically just got a cutter, and if you haven't seen a lathe before, basically a lathe spins round, and then you've got a tungsten carbide bit here, or tool, and you basically just take that over the surface of the metal, and that basically just shaves off little bits at a time until you've got the desired diameter. So I'm just going to make sure I'm roughly in the right place with that. Okay, and now I'll just take some off the just keep taking bits, strips off that until I get to the same diameter, so I've got the right diameter, the outer diameter for that. Okay, so now you can see that's all at the same diameter. So just get that out of the way. So now what I want to do is I want to now the outside diameter is right. Obviously this is the part that I'm making, and that's going to come from the end of this part here. So what I've done is I've obviously cut all that so it's the same diameter as that. Now what I will do is go over that again just to make that a little bit smoother than it is at the moment, but that's perfectly good as it is anyway. So the next part is to make the hole all the way through it. Now obviously this is the same bit of metal that this came out of, so you can see I've already got a hole running through it anyway, but that's not quite deep enough. And basically the easiest way of doing that is here. You can see I've got a drill bit there, and all I'm going to do is basically take this bit in to the piece of work like that, and I'm just going to wind that in like that into the centre of there to cut the right size diameter hole, just as we have with that one, into the centre of the piece of metal. Okay, and so that's the hole cut through the centre. So the next bit I need to do is to make this kind of recess in it, and all that is basically is putting another drill into it to that depth, so that it'll actually you know, so this piece basically will sit in there and it'll be able to rotate around. So now when you're drilling the holes through, obviously that puts a reasonable amount of torque onto the chuck, so it's well worth doing this part on this side. Then obviously what we're going to do is part this off, turn it round, and then we can form the back face. So basically the next step is to cut that sort of larger hole into that face, and then basically that will be ready for it to be parted off, and then we can turn the whole thing round and then basically make this surface here. So what I'm going to do now is just change the drill that I've got in here for a larger one, and then which is actually this one here. And that's basically the drill that I used to make that hole there. So what I can do is basically put that in there, and then all I need to do then is just drive that in to the piece to that depth, and then I'll basically got that surface there. The one thing to note is obviously these drills here are actually flat faced. Obviously a normal drill would look like that, you know, so you've got this sort of shape on the end, or even like that. So these drills have actually been modified. I've basically ground down the end there, so I've got a flat face there, so that when I cut into it I end up with a flat face there. So I'll just change the drill bit over in this chuck, and then I can just cut that to that depth, and then we've got that surface done. Okay, so now we've got the drill bit ready in there to cut into the face of that to form that. Now what we need to do now most certainly is to make sure we get it to the same depth. So all I'm doing is some verniers here, measuring the depth of that like that, and as you can see it's in inches. Hang on. Like that, by that little depth gauge there. So as you can see it's just over 5mm in depth. So what I'll need to do is, obviously when you're making anything with a lathe, obviously you can always take material out, but you can't put it back. There are certain ways around if you do make a mistake. Obviously if I cut it too deep, I could take some off this surface here, this face here, which would then basically get me back to something like that. But what I'm going to do is very gently take a bit off, come out, measure it, and then go back in, and then till I know that I've got a depth of about 5mm on that face there. Okay, so I know I'm reasonably close now, so what I'm going to do is just back off the drill bit, get some of this out of the way, and then with the depth gauge again, I'm just going to measure how much I've got in there. Yeah, and I'll just release that. So I'm looking for just over 5. Yeah, I'm almost there. It's just over 5. So what I'm going to do now is just take a very slight amount off. I don't need much off at all. I just basically need less than 1mm really. So I'm just going to place the drill back in, and then just take a very, very slight amount off, and then back straight off. Okay, that should do it. So I'm just going to quickly measure that. Yeah, so I've got 5.17, which is just about right. So what I can do now is I can release that from the chuck, and so you can actually see what we've got. So as you can see, what we've got in there is exactly the same form as I've got on there. So this piece, this is the smaller piece. As you can see, that will sit now inside there, just like it does with the other one. There's a couple of burrs in there I think I need to get rid of, but basically that sits in there just like it sits in the other one. Actually that's sitting on that edge in there then, if you can see, but basically it's the same depth like that. Okay, but that's not going quite in there as far as it should do, and that's because of the middle hole as opposed to the outside hole. So that's that side done. I'm just going to put that back in the chuck, and I'm just going to take the smaller hole through slightly more, just so it'll sit right, and then we can turn around and we can part that off. Okay, so now I'm using a slightly different tool. This is a parting off tool, and basically what that's going to do is cut a groove into this piece here to basically part it. So that's basically how much we need to cut off. Now what I'm going to do is cut slightly more off than we need, because I'm going to turn it round and then finish that face off later with the standard tool. So what I'm going to do is wind that in, the cutter in like that, and it's basically just going to cut a groove through there. Now if we look at the sort of the diameter of this, basically what I need to do is cut off that's 11.44 millimeters. So what I need to make sure of is I'm cutting off pretty much the same as that, so I need to go in a little bit more. Yeah, around there. It's always better to cut off slightly more than you need to, because you know, if you cut off, obviously you can't put material back on, so it's better to make it larger than you need. Then you can always, you know, put a nice surface on it afterwards when it's turned around. So that's probably about 0.5 millimeter more than we actually need. So what I'll do now is I'll cut into the side of there, and basically separate the piece off, so we can then turn it around and do the other face. Okay, so that's all now lined up, ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is slowly wind this in and basically cut off that piece. Now this can get, because I'm obviously cutting on all three sides of this, I'm just going to be putting a few suds on, which is basically like an oil and water mix to stop that from sticking on the inside of this, because obviously you can get a lot of friction which will potentially break the tungsten carbide bit there. So if you see me pouring some water over, which is basically the sort of cloudy milky water, don't worry about that. That's just me keeping this bit lubricated and clear, so that it doesn't break the bit. Okay, so there's the piece we've just cut off. Obviously there's the original one. So obviously we've got that side now. As you can see, there's a few rough bits on there, and what I need to do is make this little sort of collar here. Now that is very slightly, I don't know if you can see, but it's very slightly wider. So all I need to do is put that in the chuck. I'll just wind the chuck in like that, so I can just finish off this face here. So I'll just make sure that that's centre. Also, I don't want to make it too tight. Just make sure that that's centre, and then what I'll do is I'll basically cut the surface. So I'll just move the camera so you can see what I'm doing, so that it looks similar to that. Okay, so there's the part all finished. All I've done is basically just got a blade like that, and I've just sort of gone round like that, just taking off any rough bits. So all we need to do now is basically make this centre part, and obviously the centre part will then sit inside like that, just like the other one, and so it'll sort of spin around like that. So as you can see now, that's sitting quite nicely. Obviously the top bit needs to be proud so that it'll spin on its sort of axis, if you like. So those are those two pieces made. Got two identical pieces now, so we need to make this. Now all that's made out of is exactly the same thing. I've just got some aluminium bar here. So here's obviously the chuck of the lathe. I'm just going to feed it in from the other side like that, and then we can basically make it from that piece. Now obviously what I've got in the end there, just take that out a little bit more. I'll just get this out of the way, you'll be able to see what I'm doing there. So that bit that I've got in there now, that's basically the same diameter as that. So what I need to do is cut the sort of the wide diameter first, if you like. So obviously that's exactly the piece that I used to make this one. So what I need to do now is just basically carry on that depth back, so just with the normal cutter like I did before. So just cutting it like that. What I'll do is I'll just cut out this bar to that diameter all the way along to about there. I need about an inch or so to make this, and then I can then cut this back sort of more narrower part into it, which will be on the other side. Okay, so in exactly the same way we're just going to basically cut it down to that diameter which it is there, a bit further in. So I'll just do that now whilst you're looking at it from this view, and I'm going to bake another one of these going from kind of that side there. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is just cut this edge off nice and clean, and then I'll work back and to that diameter there, a bit further back, and then we'll be able to then start to create this piece. Okay, so now we've got the shaft the same diameter as that. So if we now get the larger bit, obviously that's going to now sit quite, you know, sort of nice. Now you need a reasonable amount of movement in there, obviously, because what it's going to pivot on the next bit I'm going to cut, as opposed to that bit there. All it needs to do for that is basically clear it, so you know, so you've got a reasonable amount of distance around there. So the next bit I need to cut is this diameter here. So this is where basically what I'm going to do now is cut that form into the end of there, and then I can part it off there. So obviously what I need to do now is basically starting from this side here, what I need to do is work out exactly where I need to cut to. So if I measure the depth of that like that with the verniers, just lock that off, just check that again to make sure it hasn't moved. Yeah, so I need 7.5 millimeters. So if I move in the cutting point there to 7.5 millimeters, okay, so if I start cutting there and work back, then obviously I'll know where to cut to. So I'll just start doing that now, and I'll stop in a moment to explain a little bit more. And obviously when you've got surfaces which are rotating on each other, you know, you don't want a lot of tolerance, so I'm just checking that again. I'm literally taking off a little teeny bit at a time. Now that to me feels about right, so let me just wind this out of the way. Now all things being equal, this should now fit on the end of that shaft. Yes, it does. So as you can see, that now fits over. If I just show you from here, from that side, you can just see on the end there that that's just sitting proud. It's exactly as I want it to. So all I need to do basically is to take off some more going that way, and then that'll be just right for that to sit on. As you can see, it's rotating on there. Okay, so that's now turned, as you can see. That's the same kind of shape as that. So the this will fit over like that. It'll spin round quite nicely, and it's protruding out at the back here, so it won't foul. So when I bolt that up, it'll still kind of spin around. So all I need to do now is drill the hole through for the bolt to fit in, and then I can part this off like I did the other one, turn it round, and then just countersink or this side here, so that the head of the bolt won't foul the runner on the greenhouse. So what I'll do now is just cut through there, parting the piece off so that it'll then look almost like that at that point. So I'll just cut it off now, and then you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's the piece now off. As you can see, there's the piece I've literally just cut off, and obviously there's the original one. So all I need to do now is clean up this surface by putting that back in the chuck, and then I can drill that larger hole in there for recess for the bolt head. Okay, so the previous one that I made was 5.11 in depth, so I'll just measure that one there, and that's 5.47, so I can just take off the smallest amount going into there. So I'll just do that now, and then that's going to be identical to the other one. Okay, so that's the piece fixed in there. I don't know if you can see. That's basically almost identical to this now. Now all I need to do now is drill in the hole into here in exactly the same way as I've done before with just a normal drill. So what I'm going to do is go in with a drill which is almost the right size, which is this one here, obviously flat face drill, and then I'll just finish that off with this one afterwards, which is just about the right size. So I'll just do that now, and then I'll be able to put the bolt in. But you need to be careful that it's the right depth. Obviously you don't want the bolt to be too far in or take too much material out. So I basically need to go in the right set of verniers. I basically need to go in sort of almost 6mm. I don't know if you can see that. 5.8mm. So I'll just do that now, and then I'll show you when it's finished. Okay, so there's the inner bit that we've made. I just need to clear the edges off slightly with the blade, as I explained. So the bolt sits inside there like that, and then that sits inside the other part we made previously like that. And as you can see, that will, there's a little bit of clearance in there, so that it'll actually spin quite easily. And then obviously if you look at the top plate piece there, that's protruding slightly, so that then as that spins on the underneath of the door, it won't catch anything. So we've now got two wheels that we can now fit to the bottom of the greenhouse door. Okay, so that's the two wheels ready. As you can see, that nicely spins round. I've just got a washer on that side there. As you can see, that one spins round as well. But what you could do, if you haven't, obviously, not everybody has a lathe. If you get a bearing set like that and put a bolt through the middle of it, you can get a similar sort of function. So you can buy these online. It's just called a bearing race or a bearing set, and you can basically put a bolt through the middle of there, and obviously that will spin round. So you can potentially make a wheel for the bottom of your door like that if you don't have the facilities I do. But all we need to do now is basically fit these to the bottom of the door. So I'll show you how to do that now. Okay then, so with the door in place, what I've done is I've just marked on there with a black pen. I don't know if you can see. basically where I want the edge of the wheel to come. I've done that on both sides. Now what I need to do is take the door off. I'll take the bottom pane out, and we can then fit the wheels to the bottom of the door. Okay, so there's the bottom of the door. So all I need to do basically is align that with the line that I made there, which corresponds to the track there, and then just basically drill a hole through there for the bolt to go through, and then I can bolt them both on. So I'll just do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. Okay, so that's the wheels bolted on. As you can see, they rotate quite nicely, top and bottom. So I've basically bolted them through. I'll put a nylock nut on the inside, washer either side of it, so they should now roll against the rail there, and should make the door open and close quite easily. So what I'm going to do now is put it back on the rail. This is the acid test. What it should do now is open and close quite nicely. Okay, so that's the door in place. As you can see, it now opens nice and easily. Obviously there is a little bit of slight catching, which is basically between that face there that you can see on the door there, and this sort of step. So that's the kind of the grindy sound you can hear. But you know, there's a nice clearance underneath there now, so the door's actually hanging as opposed to dragging on that bar at the bottom. And I've just put the bottom piece of glass in properly, so I've put the sticky foam round, and I've put the nice new clips in there. So that's all nice and sealed off. As you can see now, the door, that's the door outermost. As you can see, it makes a nice seal against the door seal there, which is the same all the way up. Likewise on this side here, the seal is sealing against the door, so there's no issues there at all, and it opens and closes quite easily, and more importantly it stays closed when you want it to stay closed. So that's how to improve the bottom of your greenhouse door. But as I say, you know, I have gone to town a little bit on this because I wanted to make some aluminium sort of casters for the bottom, but you know, if you're not able to do that, don't worry, you know, there are various ways of sort of getting around that. But as I say, you know, these bearing sets, you know, that would be an easy way of doing it. Just put a bolt through there and then bolt that into the bottom, and that will obviously rotate around and act as a wheel exactly the same way as what I've done with those pieces of aluminium that I've turned. So I hope this episode has been of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments or questions you've got below, and I'll always get back to you, and I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Normal Car.